I tell you what,
It's not like the olden days.
I'm Rosie,
I'm Jake.
and this is our podcast on Psycho, which is a classic film from 1960 that I think some people regard as standalone. It's sequels that finished in 1990 and the other two are in the 80s. I think that's right. Jake's nodding. And we shall also talk about Bates Motel, which has been on recently, based on the film series. Well, mainly the first film. And perhaps we'll say what we can remember about the book Psycho, and Psycho 2, by Robert Bloch, and one or two other attempts at sequels that we've never seen. So that's going to be fascinating, isn't it? But to begin with, Psycho, the 1960 film, is of course Alfred Hitchcock's very famous murder, thriller, horror sort of thing, and I think arguably the one that he's best known for. It starred Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates, along with Vera Miles and some other people whose names I've forgotten, and Janet Leigh, who gets murdered 45 minutes in. And the funny thing is that on my DVD there's a special feature where it shows you that publicity in trailers and says you have to come to the cinema before the film starts and leave at the end of the film or you won't be allowed in, which we think is hilarious because that's been going on since Psycho, really.
The first thing we ever saw at the cinema was Beauty and the Beast. That's the proper one, not Hermione and the Beast. And as far as we're concerned, you go in at the start and you leave at the end and you watch the film. And doing anything else seems rather silly.
But obviously that was a very novel idea in 1960. But I think it's started up a good idea that you watch the film from beginning to end. Apparently, people didn't used to do that. They just used to sort of wander in, and the film would play over and over and over again, and they'd leave when they felt like it. You could watch it more than once if you wanted to.
Oh, this is where we came in, Cyril. Shall we go?
Oh, maybe we should just see the end again.
Oh, yeah, one more time. Idiots.
So there we are. Psycho put a stop to that. And I think before I saw it, I heard some of the ideas people had about how much it had scared them. I think our mum had a story about watching it whilst babysitting and getting freaked out. I don't know if I would have got freaked out myself in that situation. But also things like a woman in the cinema screamed and fainted and had to be carried out on a stretcher. That kind of thing. So when I first saw Psycho as a child, I don't know how old I was, more than 10, less than 15 I think, I thought it was rather tame.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's definitely more chiller than horror, and it's not the sort of thing I used to find horrifying when I was little, which would mainly involve supernatural stuff, or sci-fi as well, if you want to count zombies as not supernatural but sci-fi. But I could see when Mum told us the story of her babysitting experiences, how being alone in the dark in this house, which wasn't her own house, could leave you feeling chilled and unnerved, if not exactly frightened, after watching it.
Yes, I've come to appreciate that more as I've got older. When I was young, though, I was thinking heads flying off, blood spurting everywhere, sort of bloodbath, and that wasn't what I got. So obviously I have too high expectations for such things.
Well, we've become so desensitised to it nowadays. And we watch things like Halloween and Friday the 13th, things from the 70s and 80s, and say, phew, tame. But of course these things come in stages, don't they?
That's right, and actually, the idea of going to stay in a motel and taking a shower and someone coming and stabbing you to death is quite scary, really.
And the fact that it is, and always has been, always will be, very atmospheric and chilling and unnerving for its audience shows how incredibly well made, well directed as part of that, the film really is.
I read the book after watching the film quite a lot of times. I thought it was a bit boring, actually. as far as I remember. I tried to read another book by Robert Bloch as well and couldn't finish it, so perhaps he wasn't very good. Certainly the film's more famous than the book, isn't it? But one thing I do remember is an interview with the screenwriter. Do you know his name?
No.
Neither do I, so sorry, screenwriter. But I do remember your interview where you said you read the book with a mind to writing this screenplay for Hitch, and you telling me that you didn't like Norman as a character, and that was one of the changes you made. You made him younger, more attractive for Hollywood, nicer, just generally a more likeable guy. He was a bit of a nasty little weirdo in the book. And apart from that, small details like the shower's just a shower, not a bath, he cuts off her head rather than stabbing her, that kind of thing. Small details like that are a bit different, but other than that, it's pretty much the same, isn't it?
Yes, it is. He's actually dead now, that screenwriter, and you're addressing him, and he's listening from heaven. But we will mention him again later, of course, because he wasn't dead 30 years after Psycho when he wrote the screenplay for Psycho 4. What about that later?
Yes, well, I shouldn't think he'd listen to us if he was alive, would you?
So we're relying on omniscience to get our message through to people we want to hear it. Before watching Psycho for the first time, when I guess I was closer to 15 than 10, what I already knew about it came from Red Dwarf and Fantastic Max. You may remember me mentioning Psycho in the Fantastic Max podcast. And also on Red Dwarf, in the original Crichton episode, we have the android version of Norman Bates, because he's looking after all these skeletons and thinking they're alive.
If I may interject before you finish, I'd seen that too, but it just totally went over my head. I didn't make the link at all. I didn't remember that Norman Bates was the name in that line, so there you are.
Neither experience of watching Red Dwarf or Fantastic Max spoiled the twist for me, but once I'd seen the twist in Psycho, I thought, oh yes, that fully explains what Red Dwarf and Fantastic Max were going on about. I picked up from Red Dwarf and Fantastic Max that Psycho was about a murderer in a hotel, and there's some sort of stuffed body involved. But the fact that, as I said in the Fantastic Max podcast, FX had appeared on screen as Mother and AB was Norman, and they were shown as different entities at one time, had made me not particularly realise that Norman and Mother were actually the same person in the film, and I hadn't fully understood the joke on Red Dwarf. So then, when Vera Miles as Lila turns the chair round and it's the stuffed skeleton Mrs. Bates, I'm like, oh, that's what Rimmer means in Red Dwarf. And oh, that's why AB's wearing the wig when he comes to wash behind Max's ears. Maybe FX's mother only existed in his mind after all. But I remember watching it for the first time and Norman's carrying Mother, the corpse, downstairs and making her say, I can walk on my own. And I was thinking, oh yes, I'm sure she can. I know she can, because I saw her walking into the bathroom and murdering Janet Leigh, so she can walk on her own. It wasn't spoiled at all, and it is very effectively done, because what's real in Norman's mind at that stage is real in the mind of the viewer. And without actually knowing the twist, even if you heard like I had little allusions to it in other shows, it wasn't spoiled and it was very effective.
Yes, we've also seen her walking out of that very door, that very shot downwards camera angle that I was going to say is very famous. I don't know if it is, but certainly it's made an impression on me.
I think it is famous, and they did bother in the end including it in Bates Motel, so someone else has noticed it, at least. Yes, of course, we've seen her rushing out and murdering Arbogast quite recently, so we're quite happy, if we don't know, with the fact that Mother is quite mobile and ready to kill.
Yes, even though it wasn't as violent as I wanted, and the body count isn't that high, is it? 2 on-screen murders. I was intrigued and puzzled by the story and wanted to know what the hell was going on. When, in fact, that Deputy Sheriff Chambers, is saying, after we've heard Mother's there and she kills people and stuff, oh, but Norman Bates' mother has been dead for 10 years, isn't it?
They're saying it's about 10 years in that film.
And I'm like, what? But she's there. I've heard her speak. I've seen her kill people. And then there's that very clever line, thanks to that screenwriter who's listening from heaven or wherever. Chambers says, if Norman Bates' mother is in his house, then who's that woman buried in the cemetery? He doesn't say, which might help us to get it a bit more easily, given that Norman Bates' mother is dead and buried, who's he got in the house?
That's right.
He's accepting what we've accepted, that she is there.
So we're very unlikely to cotton onto the fact that it's a set of encyclopedias buried in the cemetery, not a dead body at all, as we find out from Psycho 4 later on.
I don't have anything specific to say about any of the actors, actually. I don't know about you, except for Anthony Perkins, who's really good and is the reason why all those sequels, I think, work so very well. And I talked about how that screenwriter made us sympathise more towards him. He has a very kind of, I suppose in the directing they emphasise that he's still a child in many ways, with his single bed and his room full of toys.
And his frieze around the wall with childish images on it.
Yes, of course, his stuffed rabbit toy is really creepy, isn't it?
Yes.
Which fits in with the tone of the film, and then that really comes across in his performance. He's innocent, and when he finds Janet Leigh's body and thinks, oh my god, Mother's killed her, he's really surprised and horrified by it. You would never dream it's actually him dressing up, would you?
Yes, he makes Norman into a very vulnerable, very kind and caring character. Norman himself, obviously, he's got someone who's completely the opposite of that inside his head as well. And that is indeed what makes the sequels work and what drives the sequels and what they develop in the sequels, because we're a bit more in the 80s, we're a bit more tolerant and understanding of psycho nutters than we were in the 60s anyway. And by the time, I keep mentioning Psycho 4, by the time in Psycho 4 that Norman is possibly trapped and about to burn to death in his old home, we are at the stage where we don't want that to happen, and we want him to escape and have a chance of a good life with his unprofessional wife and unborn baby. And Tony Perkins took us on that journey, from Norman being a psycho to being someone we care about and sympathise with, despite the fact that he's killed almost a dozen people.
Yes, in 1960 we were not encouraged to sympathise with him at all, were we? We were like, oh my god, what a psycho, he dresses up as his mother and he kills people, lock him up and throw away the key. And in fact the psychiatrist who's been examining him, which is Dr. Richmond, not Dr. Raymond, who we'll talk about shortly I'm sure, tells us what's been going on, and if you're not thick and you can follow a plot and some dialogue, you think, oh, right, that's interesting. I do remember showing it to that thick friend of mine who didn't get it at all. But one of the things he says is the mother half of Norman's mind has taken over, probably for all time. So the psychiatrist himself is obviously not what we would call forward thinking, but in the 60s, how could they be? Forward thinking was to say he's not exactly a transvestite because he wears a dress.
Yes.
But certainly not as forward thinking as people would be in the future. His answer is, well, he's crazy and he can never be cured. And that's something that I'd like to come back to when we talk about Psycho 4 in more detail. And Psycho 2, in fact, which I think we could move on to now.
Yes. The other interesting thing about the cast, uncredited cast in Psycho, perhaps to slip in here, is that 3 women provided the voice of Mother, and the one who came back, the sequels, called Virginia Gregg. I do know that one. And whenever I've read about the 3 women, it says most scenes are a complete mixture of the 3 women doing vocalization, shouting, things, except the final monologue of Mother, which is quite famous, I think. I'm not even going to swat that fly, sort of thing, and that was all Virginia Gregg. And it was quite interesting when I was reading that one of the other 2 women who did some vocal work for Mother was the real-life wife of Sheriff Chambers, actor, and they appeared together in lots of things, including The Incredible Hulk in the early 80s. I don't know if we mentioned them in our Incredible Hulk podcast.
I can't remember at all.
But they're a pair of acting spouses.
Were they living in the house that was Norman's house remodeled, or was that other people in The Incredible Hulk?
Do you know, I think she did have Norman's front hall in her house in The Incredible Hulk.
Yes, not they, she. They weren't living together, of course, but that's an interesting factoid anyway.
But talking about Sheriff Chambers brings a bit of a link to Psycho 2, because when I was reading up about various things about bringing Psycho 2 into being, with a lot of interesting things to read about it, one of the things one can read is that in the original draft of the script that ended up being used, Sheriff Chambers was in it as the sheriff instead of the new sheriff who's in Psycho 2 and 3, and also Dr. Richmond was in it instead of Dr. Raymond being Norman's liaison psychiatrist from the mental institute, or whatever you want to call it, which I think they still did in the early 80s, the mental institution. Which would probably be a more PC term for it nowadays. But evidently it was made in 1982, Psycho 2, and it got round to being released in 1983, very much like me, really. True.
Funny way of putting it.
But evidently it's set in 1982. Norman's been in the institution for 22 years, and we suppose that that's starting counting from 1960. And I read at one point that Tony Perkins was very umming and ahhing about whether he wanted to come back to the role of Norman Bates, and eventually decided he would, because he didn't want to see someone else do it, and thank goodness he did, because he takes us on a journey through the 3 sequels that really nobody else could. But I suppose the decision to replace the sheriff is understandable, because he was quite old originally, Sheriff Chambers, Deputy Sheriff Chambers. They forget he's Deputy Sheriff, he's referred to as Sheriff Chambers in the sequel. But then the new sheriff they replaced him with is quite old as well, so they could have kept him. I like that actor, it wouldn't have been so bad to have him in it, but it was a good idea, we were discussing, to have Dr. Raymond rather than Dr. Richmond, because Dr. Raymond is quite progressive about Norman's cure, and is perhaps a bit of a renegade in the psychiatry world, thinking that you can cure Norman's illness at all. And that would have been a very big change around for Dr. Richmond's point of view over 22 years, wouldn't it?
Yes, I couldn't see him being supportive like Dr. Raymond is, and helping Norman out, checking up on him, telling him, oh yes, you're going to be fine, you're not crazy anymore, after he said all that probably for all time. I remember I got very interested in Psycho by the time we saw Psycho 2, and I was very keen to see it, and I wasn't disappointed, and I do remember being got by and engaged by the bit where Norman comes home and walks into his house and you see all the same set and there's this atmospheric music, and music can be annoying. It can either feel like it's telling you what you're supposed to feel like, or if they're doing it well, it can add to the feelings that they're instilling in you, which I think this does. It's got this atmospheric music. Norman's looking around the house thinking, oh God, I went so mad here. I killed my mother. I dressed up with her and killed her. There's other people. Is this really such a good idea? And I thought that was very effective.
And he starts going rather mad again, even before anyone starts trying to drive him mad again, doesn't he? He's hearing his mother's voice and seeing her dead hand on the floor. But I suppose we can forgive him that. It all comes rushing back when he's back in the house for the first time in over 20 years. And he probably would have been alright if he'd been left alone just to get on with it.
Yes, but as you say, some people are trying to drive him mad, and I think from the start we're pretty sure Lila Loomis, née Crane, who has married her dead sister Marion's boyfriend from the first film, you pretty much know she's behind it, but then does she have an accomplice? How does Norman's diner waitress young house guest fit into it all, if she does at all? And who's doing the murders? You know it's not Norman, because partly he's locked in the attic for the first one, and partly because we sympathise with him now and we know they're not going to make him be the killer. And I remember thinking, well, it's not Lila, is it? Lila's not far gone enough to want to go around dressing up and stabbing people, but then she does seem the most likely suspect.
And she has gone pretty nuts in it, even if not murderously so, as we see by the end.
But then the point where we think, oh my God, it's not Lila, who the hell is it, is when she gets killed herself, rather fittingly, in the basement, where she was finding Mother's corpse in the first film, and Norman came to kill her, and then he didn't because Sam came and stopped him. But then the next time she's messing about down there with less justifiable motives, she gets killed there. So that was a good bit of homage to the original.
This time she's really after it. She should have left well alone. I think Norman, Anthony Perkins, and Mary do have quite good chemistry in their funny little friendship that they form. That bit where he's talking about his one happy memory of his mother and the toasted cheese sandwiches. You feel for him there, I always do. It could come across as a bit cliche and make you think, oh yeah, whatever. But I think that's very well done, and I think by then we really have started to feel for Norman and think of him more as a victim of his mother, of himself, of Lila and her accomplice, of the person who's really doing the murders.
Yes, you would never guess who it is the first time, would you?
No, we'd completely forgotten she was in the film at all. She comes to the door at the end and we're like, who is that?
Yes, you have to watch it again and you go, oh, there she is.
There she is.
She's a waitress in the diner. God, we haven't seen her for ages. By the time she turns up at the end.
I quite like Dennis Franz of NYPD Blue fame in that film as Mr. Toomey, the unscrupulous manager who's been running the motel in the interim. Got some funny yelling at Norman. I guess have a good time. What did yours get? Dead! Killed by you, you loony! The sort of thing Dennis Franz is good at doing. Funny, abusive shouting.
Yes, stating the truth in very bold terms there and making it sound funny.
He managed to get 12 years of NYPD Blue out of doing exactly that. And there is his dry run for it in Psycho 2.
So we have Vera Miles returning as Lila, and then this girl who's living with Norman for a bit is called Mary, and initially we're told she's called Mary Samuel, and that is a clue if you remember that Marion booking into the Bates Motel used the alias Marie Samuel, her boyfriend Big Sam.
It's a blatant clue, isn't it?
I didn't get that the first time because I've forgotten that bit.
Again, that's probably something you spot the second time and think, oh, yeah, like Mrs. Spool.
Yes, if you were a huge Psycho fan and had been watching it a lot for 22 years before you saw the film, you'd get it, wouldn't you? But that wasn't us. and she's played by Meg Tilly. And to be able to pull off the kind of scene that you were just talking about and make a compelling relationship and to make the watcher believe in her journey, she has to do a very good job, and I think she does.
Yes, it's difficult to do coming back after 22 years and making this coherent sequel, paying lots of homage to the original, changing how we feel about Norman, or developing it, certainly, and I really don't think you can do a better job of it. I mean, plenty of things where they come back to it later and try to do such things, it ends up being complete rubbish and a sad, husk imitation of the original, and let's hope Hey Arnold Jungle Movie is going to turn out that way. But I think Psycho 2 deserves a lot of praise for doing it successfully.
Yes, absolutely. Mostly thanks to Tony Perkins, and he has a very, very good supporting cast as well. And if we haven't made it clear, Mary is Lila's daughter, and she is a plant. She gains Norman's trust and goes to live with him, saying she's been splitting up with her boyfriend, has got nowhere to stay, and that kind of thing, in order to drive him mad, because Lila wants him locked up again. And it's sort of like Lila represents the old attitude from the 60s, and then Mary getting to know Norman as a person and starting to sympathise with him and seeing how he doesn't really want to be mad and kill people at all, represents the new attitude that they are instilling in the audience towards him. So she does a bit of a terror in Teen Titans and that kind of thing, where she goes to be somebody's enemy and ends up liking them and going over to the other side.
Yes, Kovu in The Lion King 2 is the other one I always think of for that.
Yeah.
But it's a classic plot structure and used well in Psycho 2.
Yes, I really believe in her. The turning point for her, I think, is where she says she's been with Norman when the murder happened. It's just some random kids smoking dope, messing around in the basement. She lies and says she's been with him because she knows he didn't commit the murder, and she knows that because she's locked him in the attic to help him go mad and cleared up his mother's room, which she set up like it used to be also to help him go mad. And then she's telling Lila about it. She's saying, oh, but I know he didn't do it. He was locked in the attic. And Lila's saying, well, so what? This would have got him locked up again. So you see there how Lila wants to have him reinstitutionalised at all costs, and Mary wants to do what's right.
So clearly Psycho 2 had some measure of success, not just in our minds, as they came back 3 years later with Psycho 3. And it's actually set, not 3 years later, but a few months later, where the spool is a missing person for reasons that are very obvious if you've seen the end of Psycho 2. And Norman's very much back in the old situation like he was at the start of Psycho. And like at the start of Psycho, we begin the film with someone at the moment who is unrelated to Norman. And when we first got the video of Psycho 3, we hadn't seen it on the telly. We'd already seen on the telly Psycho 2 and Psycho 4, but they never showed Psycho 3, and nobody ever seemed to want to show it to us. So eventually we have this video of it, off an Amazon seller. And the video went in and it started the film, and it was this nun stuff.
Yes, the video itself came in the Psycho 3 case, of course, but wasn't labelled. And I had the thought, oh, I hope they sent the right video, not put the wrong video in the box or something. So then this film starts, and it's about a nun who wants to commit suicide.
And I say they've sent us Nun on the Run instead.
You and our mum were completely freaking out, going, oh, they sent the wrong video, oh my god. I was thinking maybe they have, and I said, well, let's just wait and see what the name of the film is. And fortunately it was Psycho 3.
Yes, she starts running off with her suitcase, and it flashes up Anthony Perkins, and we're like, oh, you. But of course, the structure of the film mirrors the structure of the first film, where this nun character,
not that Marion is a nun,
Maureen Coyle,
what a pretty name,
goes off and is fated to end up at the Bates Motel, just as Marion Crane did and was in the first film. And of course, Maureen reminds Norman of Marion, even though she looks nothing like her. And I did read that there was talk of trying to get Janet Leigh to play the part of Maureen Nunn, but she didn't do it. And, well, she probably would have been a bit old to be that character and still look like she did.
Yes, she's got the same initials, of course, Marion Crane, Maureen Coyle. She's got short blonde hair like Janet Leigh, and I do remember thinking, oh, can't we stop going on about Marion now? Okay, the first sequel was What Happens to Lila after everything, and she's still hung up on Marion. But then, by the third one, I don't think we need to bother with it anymore and see the shower scene again.
Yes, I agree. I think a big plus for Psycho 3 is that it is very amusing in places, but it also keeps us sympathising for Norman and is very poignant. And Maureen goes to Norman, oh, you're very kind. And we think, oh yes, he is very kind, isn't he? Norman is. Unfortunately, if you get involved with him, you're likely to meet the very unkind half of his mind as well.
Yes, it's interesting. Norman does now seem to be more aware, I'm always saying this, more aware that Mother is coming from inside his head. Like when he's saying to her, you came back, and she is saying, I never went away, don't you know that by now? And he needs a body to help him out, but he seems to know that she's a part of him more than he knew that in 1960. And he is dressing up and killing people, but still we're sympathising with him because it's so presented that they're two different people, and everything that she is making him do is against his will.
It's heartbreaking, I was thinking when we were watching it quite recently. If only he could overcome her, like he's so desperately trying to. And at the end, when unfortunately she's caused him to push Maureen down the stairs, when he's rebelling against her and stabbing the corpse, so I don't have the guts to her, that's good to see him overthrowing her in that way. It very much is that we're rooting for Norman and are sorry for Norman, despite the fact that he's this murdering psycho still.
Yes, and they begin that, don't they, in Psycho 2? You were talking about the toasted cheese sandwiches scene. Of course, the bit I like is in the kind of next bit where they're in the room spending the night. Norman barricaded the door because he thinks people are after them, and Mary thinks it's just Lila. And he's going around with his knife in his left hand, and Norman's left-handed, and then Mother starts waking up and thinking, shall I kill Mary while she's lying there asleep? And he moves the knife into his right hand. Very cleverly done, and you think, oh, poor Norman. But actually, he's right about someone phoning him up and stalking him and killing people and stuffing towels down his toilet and stuff. It's Mr. Spool, but then that makes him go mad anyway, and we end up with Psycho 3.
So, really, thanks to Tony Perkins taking Norman on this journey, the Psycho sequels very much worth doing. And the Tony Perkins gift to the world in the last 10 years of his life, you can see how he is getting progressively iller with his AIDS-related complications. During the time between 1982 and 1990, he actually died in 1992, he gets this terrible palsy in his face, doesn't he? And it does help to make him be kind of sinister.
Yes, from an artistic point of view, it does make him seem sort of mad, and you believe that his madness is real because of a sort of physical manifestation of it, even though it's HIV related or whatever it was. Sorry, Tony, I don't know much about it.
Yes, I don't know what sort of treatment he was receiving in those days for HIV and AIDS complications. Obviously, as everyone knows from Forrest Gump, we hardly knew anything about it back in those days. And I believe I've read it was caught rather late in Tony Perkins, and there was nothing they could really do to stave it off. But yes, it certainly adds something to the sinister aspect of Norman's character, as well as Tony's fantastic acting itself.
Shall we talk about the other characters in Psycho 3 and a bit about the plot now? As you were saying, people are wondering what's happened to Mrs. Spool, and there's a journalist called Tracy Venable trying to find out whether Norman's killed her or not, and in the end she finds out that he has. He stuffed her, and she's mother.
And she, of course, finds out all the truth about Norman's family history. And Mrs. Spool wasn't really Norman's mother after all. Mother was his real mother. And
Yes.
Mrs. Spool just was believing that Norman was her son because she was utterly nuts as well.
Yes, she was, and she said this, and this is true, I think, Norma Bates' sister, and she had a story that she herself, Mrs. Spool, Emma Spool, gave birth to Norman and had to give him to her sister because she had to go to the loony bin. And not all of that is true. She did have to go to the loony bin because there isn't any history of sanity in the family, is there?
None, they're all mad.
But Norman isn't her son, but she likes to think he is because she was in love with his father, and according to Tracy Venable and what she finds out, she killed Norman's father, which we'll talk some more about later, won't we?
Yes, poor old Norman, from birth or indeed pre-birth, he's had people abusing him and making him absolutely mad in several ways.
Yes, nature and nurture working against him.
Mm.
And the other main character, apart from the guy who owns the diner and the sheriff, who return along with Myrna the waitress to be supporting cast, the other main character is Dwayne Duke, but you can call me Duke, who's a young Lothario wanting to go to Los Angeles and become a rock and roll star and working in the motel for a bit and getting off with all the women and wanting to make a quick buck and telling Tracy what he knows and then finding Norman's corpse that he keeps as mother and trying to blackmail him with that and getting killed as a result.
Yes, I was very interested to read that the initial idea of Duke was that he found out about Norman's history and became obsessed with it, and actually was the killer in Psycho 3, a copycat killer, to be a bit of a twist. So we thought it was Norman and Mother all along, it was actually Duke. But they didn't go with that in the end, which is a good idea, because after Psycho 2, you want to see Norman doing a bit more killing as Mother, don't you? You don't want it to turn out, oh yeah, it's this random copycat killer, actually. But I did always think, what really is the point of Duke then? I suppose he's leaking information to the journalist, and he's a way to get Maureen to the motel, but it seemed like he should have more of a journey in the film than he really did, and it was cut off rather abruptly with his murder. And when I read of his original purpose, I thought, yes, I can see how that makes sense.
I think a hangover from that is that Norman kills a girl without actually having spoken to her. I can't remember if it's before or after he kills the girl, but Duke brings back from the bar and has it off with and then leaves her outside with taxi money. But they do go to the trouble of having Norman interact with her and open up the icebox for her. And you think, oh fine, Mother comes to kill her because Norman fancies her. But then Patsy Boyle, who goes missing because she's been killed on the toilet from the football young people's group, he doesn't interact with her at all, and I pointed out the last time we watched it, oh, but Norman hasn't spoken to her, how does he know he fancies her? And you said, well, that's probably because originally Dwayne was copycat killing her.
And you can see as well from the first girl you were mentioning how it would be quite intriguing that she gets thrown out by Duke and we assume that Norman has come and killed her, but actually it turns out to be Duke all along, and you think, oh yeah, that does make sense. I think both of those are hangovers, but definitely the right decision not to do that, but it does, I think, leave Duke feeling a bit out of place or lacking his full purpose in the final version of the film. and that does come through, and it's not surprising to read his original function.
Yes, of course, as you mentioned, Maureen survives till very nearly the end. But like in the first movie, Norman spies on her through the spy hole, which we haven't mentioned, but I think everyone knows about that if they know anything about Psycho. And then Mother comes to kill her, but the twist is that she's got in the bath and slit her wrists. So Norman ends up getting her to hospital and saving her life. And we like the bit where she's saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I tried to kill myself." She says something like, "I must have left the bathroom in an awful mess." And Norman goes, "I've seen it worse." And we're remembering when there was all that, what turns out to be brown sauce for blood splattered all over the bathroom in Psycho, and he gets out his mop and bucket and spends about 5 minutes cleaning it all up. And I say you wouldn't have a scene like this in a film nowadays, just like 5 minutes of someone cleaning. And then you say, "Isn't it funny how easily you could cover up a murder in the 60s, because they didn't have all their forensics and stuff."
Yes, that's right. All that bath and basin and everything would condemn Norman in no time nowadays. Yes, that I've seen it worse is one of the very funny bits of Psycho 3, and we always enjoy the bit where the journalist Tracy goes and interviews the previous owner of the diner, and we probably can't laugh at this anymore because he's rather senile.
Yes, shaky hands as well, he's doing his jigsaw puzzles.
Spool? I know it's Spool. Yes.
Worked for you in your diner.
I had a diner.
And Mrs. Spool worked for you.
A woman named Spool used to work for me.
Yeah, something like that.
It's funny, but he does give her the information she's after. Funny and useful scene.
Yes, and they also make comedy out of him hiding Patsy's body, don't they? Which, making a joke out of the murders. They didn't do that in the 60s or Psycho 2.
And the sheriff is eating some of the ice, and it's got the blood from the dead body on it, and Norman's like, "Oh, God." And it's just amusing. It's adding an extra element to it. You've got the slasher stuff, you've got the poignant, interesting stuff about Norman and Mother and sympathising and rooting for Norman, and you've also got some comedy. And I suppose if it had turned out that Dwayne was the killer, a copycat killer, you would have had a surprise mystery element in there as well. Perhaps they thought that was just a bit too much extra for an hour and a half.
Yes. Which film out of Psycho 2 and Psycho 3 has the bigger body count? They've both got quite a lot, haven't they? Or does Psycho 3 just have the 3 of them? No, 4 of them. Those 2 girls, Duke and Maureen.
How many does Psycho 2 have?
Psycho 2 has quite a lot as far as I remember. Mrs. Spool kills Dennis Franz, the kid in the basement, and Lila. Norman kills Mrs. Spool. Mary kills Dr. Raymond, and the police kill Mary.
So that's 8, isn't it? So Psycho 2 has the biggest body count, definitely.
And the most murderers, or killers as well. It doesn't count as murder if you're shot by police, does it?
No, that's a separate way of dying. You can tell from Dead or Alive when someone's shot by police, not murder.
And Mary more manslaughtered, murder-threed Dr. Raymond, didn't she?
Yes, she did. Yes, there's a lot going on in that one.
Whereas Psycho only has 2 on-screen deaths. Very tame in comparison.
Well, when we were watching them through, I said I think my order of favourite Psycho films is the same as the order they were released in. Psycho, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, and Psycho 4. And one thing I said about Psycho 4, which is actually a made-for-TV movie, and you can tell because it has very obvious bits where there were adverts, was that it had more in the negative column for me than it did in the positive column. And I said the good thing about it is Anthony Perkins' continued journey of Norman that he takes us on, and the fact that at the conclusion of that journey we don't want him to burn to death, as I say, and we do want him to have some hope for the future. But the flashbacks, despite everything they're trying to do in Psycho 4, the beginning, do have a lot of issues and problems.
Yes, now the interesting thing is that the original screenwriter wrote it, but he didn't bother checking his original script, did he?
That's right. There are inconsistencies about when the motel was built. how old Norman was, whether it was 10 years ago, when Norman's father had died.
Yes, they say he made all the peepholes in the motel, whereas in Psycho, Norman says his father died, then his mother got the boyfriend, then he persuaded her to build the motel. But that doesn't work at all, does it?
Exactly. And what was it in the original? Mother was cross because she'd found out that Chet, as he is, the new boyfriend, was married, but then she knows all about it in Psycho 4. We're going to get married when his divorce comes through.
Having said that, it's a decent cover story for Norman, who killed them both, isn't it? Oh yeah, she found out he was married. No one could prove that she knew about it all along.
And it's all very well for the screenwriter, and he can't defend himself now, of course, to say he wanted to not do anything with, ignore all the stuff about Mrs. Spool and those developments and just work as a sequel to his own screenplay. But he didn't even do that coherently. That's the problem I have with it.
Yes, if you're going to ignore the fact that Norman's father was stung to death by bees, so Mrs. Spool, if you want to make that fit, must be a mad beekeeper.
And now there's an ensuite bathroom in Mother's bedroom and things.
And it's not tea, it's iced tea, because she's sexy rather than old and crusty.
That's right, in my mind she became old, so her voice became old. And that girl he murders is too aware of him in the local community. He's supposed to be very isolated. She comes up looking to have liaisons with him and knows something about him. The motel isn't this isolated world that it's presented as in the first movie. Another unfortunate thing about Psycho 4, which is unavoidable, unfortunately, is that Virginia Gregg, the voice of Mother, had died in 1986, so she wasn't able to do Mother in the final film. And like the fact that Richard Harris wasn't around for the Harry Potter films after the second one, it's unavoidable, but it does add to all the things that make it not quite as good anymore, despite the fact that most of them can be helped and this one can't be helped.
Yes, to be fair, the new voice of Mother is better than Michael Gambon, isn't she?
Oh, yes.
Another thing that you were telling me you didn't like, and I agree with you, is that the relationship with his mother is too abusive and uncomfortable. There's no love between them at all.
That's right, it's horrible and uncomfortable, and really, you can't match it up with those toasted cheese sandwiches memories and things. Even when he's very small and she's tickling him at the funeral and things like that, she's always horribly abusing him.
Yeah, okay, so she's crazy, but she shouldn't be crazy all along, and there should be some less weird, slightly sexual bits, where she is being nice to him.
And that's something they did much better in Bates Motel, the TV series, where you see that Norman and his mother's relationship is strange and unhealthy, but they love each other very much as well.
Yes, I think it would be okay to have something between the two. Not for the TV series where it's sustained and you need to sympathise with both of them. But for the film, something where she is going completely nuts and can crack and be awful, and that would be the influence that makes the mother in his mind so insane and make him kill everybody. But also have lucid moments where you can see the closeness and the love between them.
Yes, that's what you really need for Psycho 4, and it's just not happening. So I don't really like most of all of the flashbacks in that. Although Henry Thomas from E.T. does as good a job as one could ever hope as young, abused Norman.
Yeah, you're not going to get a better one. And Olivia Hussey plays Mother, doesn't she? And, you know, the role that they gave her wasn't what we wanted, but that's not her fault. And she's, you know, good at what they give her to do.
That's right. She brings to life what they're going for perfectly. It's just that it doesn't really match up with what we've come to think of as Mother, what we'd like to see in flashback.
I do think the way that she delivers the mad ranting is consistent with the way that Norman does Mother's voice after she's dead.
Yes, it's good to see that link, because I was having trouble matching them up at all, and I thought, oh yes, I see how that turns into mad rant Mother Norman voice.
So again, some good casting, and then we've got the modern day cast, haven't we, which is Andy Perkins and his wife Connie, and the people on the Fran Ambrose show.
Which I do much prefer to the flashbacks. And you can tell when it's adverts from the original TV movie showing, because Fran Ambrose will say there's some adverts coming in a radio show now, and we come back, and she says, and we're back, talking about boys who killed their mothers.
Yes, and Norman's phoned in to tell her everything, and he's giving us all the flashbacks, and I must remember to talk about how it's actually quite an effective structure, even though the flashbacks aren't what they should be. But before that, I'd like to mention that Dr. Richmond is there, and he's a different actor like Mother's voice, because the original one was dead, wasn't he?
Yes, that's right.
But, you know, he's enough like the original actor, and obviously he'd be a lot older, so you don't think, oh, that's not him.
And the attitude is correct. Unlike Dr. Raymond's attitude, it matches up with Dr. Richmond's attitude from 30 years ago.
Yes, it does. And the interesting thing is that we no longer are encouraged to agree with it and sympathise with it. And it's the same screenwriter, so obviously he's moved with the times, but his character hasn't. And we don't like Dr. Richmond, and he wants to say all the wrong things, and he has this really narrow-minded attitude towards Norman and whether he's going to go around killing everybody. So that's very interesting. But yes, the structure of the story that he tells, I did think was effective. It starts with the status quo that we remember from Psycho, where he's got the corpse in the house and he's running the motel, and a girl comes along. Janet Leigh was about 32, I think, but she was still a girl, being unmarried. And this time, one of his contemporaries, as you were saying, which isn't ideal, comes along. He fancies her. In fact, they start getting into bed and everything, and Mother, via Norman, kills her. And you think, oh yes, I remember that from the film. Then we get the flashbacks to Norman's childhood and teenage times, where Mother's alive, she's a complete cow to him, she gets her boyfriend, who's also awful to Norman. You know, they didn't have to do that, did they? Again, like in Bates Motel, Alex, the man, is nice to Norman and tries to get on with him. But in the film, they're having sexual intercourse very loudly while he's making their iced tea for them. And Chet, who's the boyfriend, makes him do boxing and punches him in the face, and they laugh at him and that kind of thing. And you sort of think, well, no wonder he killed them.
Yes, again, it's too extreme, just like the wider relationship with Mother.
So then there's that, and then initially I thought that should have gone earlier on, when, again, it's the status quo from the first film. Mother's a corpse, along comes a woman to be killed. But then I realised it's to sort of remind us of the status quo, having been so far back. It's to remind us how they end up just before he kills Mother and Chet, which is a good climax to the flashback, because it's the sort of crux of the whole story, isn't it? This is how his whole life ended and his new life began, and the way that Tony Perkins gets into it by saying, I'm going to go and kill my wife now, and they're saying, is your mother making you kill again? He says, no, this time it's just going to be me, just like the first time. And that is the one time that his mother wasn't making him do it, and I thought that was very effective.
Yes, it's very good the way Tony Perkins says that, just like the first time. And then it dissolves into the flashback and they go, aha.
Yes, unfortunately, there's too much faffing about and they take too long to die, and they're drinking the wrong kind of tea anyway in that flashback, but there you go.
Yeah, we could have done without all the crawling down to the cellar. I mean, obviously the cellar is important because he stores her body down there. And incidentally, in Psycho 3, I was very upset that the cellar isn't in it at all. It's in 1, 2, and 4. But then, in the first film, we've heard Norman found them together in bed. So obviously when he's reported that Mother and Chet are dead and they've killed each other, he's then dragged them both back up and stuck them back in bed, has he? Yes, okay, then I suppose so.
Yeah, even if you're going to do that, you don't really want the bit where you think it's over and they're dead, and then, oh, Chet's still not dead yet. What I did think was quite effective, and would have been more effective if they'd done the relationship properly, was the way Mother was looking at him in her dying moments.
And he's cleaning up the vomit from her mouth and brushing her hair out of her eyes. But yeah, they just didn't have the right build-up for that, as we were saying.
So a lot of potential there that wasn't really realised. And it's in that film where Norman says he's killed damn near a dozen people, and we always work out it's 11. Shall we go through them?
Yes, have a go. It's hard to get them all in one go.
Let's see. Mother and Chet, the two women before Marion, Arbogast. So now that's everyone up to the end of Psycho, I think. So then it's Mrs. Spool, Psycho 3, Duke, Patsy, Maureen, and the girl who comes home with Duke. Did we ever find out her name? Duke says, gee, I've got to ask.
Perhaps we don't. So people who go around saying, ooh, Psycho 4's only a sequel to Psycho, not Psycho 2 and 3, are quite wrong. And, of course, they make an allusion to Psycho 3 when they say at the radio station, since the last murders at the motel 4 years ago. Although actually, in continuity terms, as I spotted when I was a teenager and thought, terrible continuity mistake, although of course it's not the only one. It was 4 years ago that Psycho 3 the film was made, but if it's 30 years after the original, it should be 8 years ago in the continuity where Norman came out of the mental institution 22 years later.
Yeah, they don't bother checking that sort of thing, do they? But if you like pedantic continuity errors, you might be interested that Lila in Psycho 2 has a petition signed by her family and the families of the other 6 people he'd murdered, making 7, which can't be right, can it? He's killed Mother and Chet. Well, she hasn't got petitions from Mother's family anyway, because that's Norman and Mrs. Spool. Maybe Chet's, I don't know. So that's potentially 1, and then there's those 2 other women and Arbogast. So apart from her family and Norman's family, he's killed 4 people, 6 altogether, not 7. So there you are. Someone didn't check that.
The other thing about Psycho 4, as far as the Fran Ambrose show goes, it's quite a good way to get into it and a good sort of bumper between adverts. And it's very quotable, isn't it, Fran Ambrose? You gonna kill your wife?
That's one of your favourite quotes.
Another one of my favourite quotes from Psycho 3 when some woman wanders off and I say what Duke says when Maureen gets out of the car. But what I was always very disappointed about at the end of Psycho 4 is that Norman hangs up on the Fran Ambrose show before the final adverts. I said, show's over. Slam the phone down. Very effectively done by Tony Perkins there. But we don't see any more of the Fran Ambrose show cast, who are terribly worried that they've encouraged Norman Bates to go off and kill again.
Or at least not stopped him.
Well, exactly, yes. So we should see at the end, when the house is all burnt down and the fire truck is there and the firemen are there, Fran Ambrose and her team should be there as well in their radio station car, checking that everything is all right, because they found out who Norman is and they found out what's going on at the motel. It's been abandoned, and really they should be there checking it out and saying, oh, is everything all right, Norman? You're not going to kill your wife after all? And, we wouldn't even have to see that on the screen. We could just see them arriving in their car, coming up to see what's going on, so it wouldn't spoil the effective ending where Norman and his wife, I keep forgetting her name, Connie, walk away and leave Mother, hopefully, locked away in the fruit cellar forever. Fran Ambrose and friends being there wouldn't have to spoil it or add any more dialogue. It would just add a bit of realism to see some more of them after they've become all involved and invested, and then we just don't see them after Norman slams down the phone.
Yes, that's true. Isn't the last shot the basement hatch slamming on the rocking chair and Mother's voice, trapping her forever, hopefully? I think that's very effective. It certainly has its moments.
Yes, I think if the flashbacks were rethought and redone, it would be well up there with Psycho 2 and 3 as a sequel. But as it is, those negatives in the flashbacks column and some of the little details about the modern day stuff, not modern day now, is it? It's nearly 30 years ago, do make it more on the negative side for me overall. But always important to watch as part of the Psycho watch through. Not a chore or anything.
Yes. I'm wondering what to talk about next. I think we've probably said all we want to about the book, but an interesting thing is that there was a book, Psycho 2, and I forget whether it was written before the film was made. I think maybe it was, wasn't it?
Yes, it was released in 1982, the book, and the film was made in 1982. I suppose they quickly realised, right, well, we're not going to use this book for the sequel. Let's get the new screenplay sorted.
Robert Bloch managing to cash in on it anyway. But yes, it's got to do with Norman escaping and dressing up as a nun, hasn't it? I mean, I haven't read it, so I don't really know anything about it except for that premise. But then, would they have thought of Maureen being a nun who makes people fall off the belfry if that idea wasn't in Psycho 2? Who knows?
It's a bit like the Lost World novel by Michael Crichton, really, isn't it? They've taken a lot of inspiration from it for future work, but they haven't really adapted it into the film as such.
Yes. Is Lila in the book Psycho 2?
Yeah, do you know, I think she and Sam being married is in Psycho 2, the book, which is where they got it from for the film, and Norman goes after them to have unfinished business.
Yes, so obviously Robert Bloch still doesn't want us to sympathise with Norman, so yes, a lot like The Lost World. Some ideas taken, but done really completely differently. What was that other attempt at a sequel that Tony Perkins didn't want to do? Something about another nutter running the motel.
It's another TV series called Bates Motel from like the late 80s. And Norman has left the hotel to some other nutter from the institution who goes and reopens it and murders people.
The original premise that Norman was in it and Tony Perkins was asked and sort of encouraged him to murder people.
Yes.
I think I read that.
Yes, from inside the institution.
Yes, so that sounds like a load of rubbish, doesn't it?
He became the Krang or Horde Prime or Stampede to the new murderer, kind of building on the idea that was abandoned for Dwayne Duke there, I suppose.
So there we are, that's what we know about that one, and it's worth mentioning because it sounds like a lot of rubbish, and obviously it would have been because, well, obviously it was because Tony Perkins didn't want to be in it, and if it was any good, he didn't want to be in it. And we've talked a bit about Bates Motel, but let's go into a bit more detail. It stars Vera Farmiga as Norma Bates and Freddie Highmore as Norman, and I was a bit horrified to hear that to start with because I did not like Freddie Highmore doing the kind of child acting that Hollywood loves, being all wet and lispy.
It's my chocolate. I can do what I want.
That's an example from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. There was also that awful 5 children in it thing.
Oh, wasn't that terrible?
Terrible interpretation of the film and Freddie Highmore doing the same sort of thing.
Eddie Izzard spelling it out, you learn lesson. And he's this crustacean, but Sammy Adams is supposed to die if they get wet.
Yeah, and he deliberately made the wish go wrong. It didn't go wrong because it was fundamentally flawed, and all sorts of things wrong with it, really, weren't they? But anyway, there was...
Not worth talking about at all.
No, not at all. Thank goodness we didn't.
Yeah.
And then there was Finding Neverland that he was in, which I thought was also a bad film. He was in that with Kate Winslet and Johnny Depp. And it was terribly saccharine. I thought that was awful. And again, he was doing the same sort of things. So I was like, I don't like Freddie Highmore. And quite recently, we heard him doing some acting in that thing about robots.
Astro Boy. God, yes, I watched the first half hour of Astro Boy on mute to see if I wanted to record it on +1. And I thought, oh, I do. It's terribly poignant. I terribly feeling for this character.
You weren't sure if you didn't want to watch it because it was unbearably emotional.
That's right.
And then you asked me what did I think. I said, oh yes, that sounds very interesting. I'd like to watch something about artificial intelligence and robot rights.
But then when we heard Freddie Highmore doing the lines, having recorded it off +1, I completely lost all interest and sympathy with Toby and Astro Boy.
And the rest of the cast, apart from Eugene Levi, wasn't much good either, was it?
That was indeed the problem.
And yeah, so Freddie Highmore wasn't very good in that, and I spotted, I think, a couple of bits, because it's hard for us to tell whether his American accent is much good. Apparently it's not, and I spotted a couple of bits like he said summing instead of something, which they don't say in America. And apparently when he started being Norman in Bates Motel, people said his American accent was no good, and I really couldn't tell, I'm afraid. But what he can do is copy Anthony Perkins doing things like running up the stairs and standing with his hands in his pockets and that kind of thing. So obviously his strengths lie in physical acting and imitation.
Yes, Freddie definitely found his niche there at last, evoking Anthony Perkins in a physical sense. And he obviously worked very hard at that and did a very effective job.
Yes, and I don't know if the accent got better, but I certainly think by season 2 he was delivering his lines very well and managed to make us laugh in the comedy bits, didn't he?
Yes.
So really that was the one and only thing Freddie Highmore was born to do. And fortunately he's still alive, so he's not going to listen to this here and slagging him off. It was good. There was a time, wasn't there, when they didn't know how many more seasons they were going to have and nothing was really happening.
It was marketed and sold and advertised as a prequel to Psycho, but it very quickly became obvious that it was a reimagining. Even in the first season, I said they're not going to be able to end up in anything like the same situation because the motel isn't at all isolated. It's part of this community, White Pine Bay, and not even taking into account the fact that it's set in modern times, so it'd be harder to keep your mother's body stuffed and not have forensics all over the place anyway. You know, the fact that they're now in the middle of this community and people popping in and out, Norman was never going to be able to do it like he did in the films, and indeed he didn't do it like he did in the films. So it was obvious things were going to turn out differently right from the start.
One of the first things that we noticed was that it wasn't the 50s, sort of like Smallville in that respect. A kind of prequel to What You Know and Love, but not really.
Yes, they really should stop peddling these things as prequels. They're reimagining starting at a prequel stage.
You know, I wasn't a bit surprised when Marion did the taking the money and going to stay in the motel and getting in the shower and he didn't kill her. I saw that coming a mile off.
Yes, season 1 was interesting, and you mentioned Alex Romero, the sheriff, earlier. He was always a cool character. I like it when you kill someone and Alex comes in and sees what's happened and goes, okay, here's what happened, and tells you how they're going to cover it up.
Yes, I sometimes wonder if they knew all along that he was the man that Mother gets involved with and pushes Norman over the edge, or if they decided to make him the man when they realised he had chemistry with Vera Farmiga.
And then seasons 2 and 3 are a bit of a letdown and a slog. And it's mostly about this drug trade that's going on in White Pine Bay. And Dylan, Norman's half-brother and first cousin, who's a very annoying character, has a lot of screen time there. And then when they knew that they were going to make seasons 4 and 5 and then stop, they got themselves sorted, got into the Mother and Norman stuff and had Norman kill her and try to kill himself at the end of season 4, and then she was in his mind in season 5. And so the show really had some focus and was a lot better.
Yes, with the way they were building their relationship, I was thinking, why is he going to kill her then? I can't really see it taking that direction. I can't see how it's going to work. But of course he doesn't poison her drink with strychnine. He tries to kill both her and himself with carbon monoxide poisoning and drift off into a peaceful sleep. And while he was setting it all up, they were playing Mr. Sandman, which I seem to remember you thought wasn't very effective.
Oh, I've quite forgotten.
But I thought it was quite good because it's the going to sleep theme and he wants to sort of dream forever kind of thing. And I think in an earlier series, Mr. Sandman was their special song they used to sing, and at the time you'd forgotten about that. So obviously using Mr. Sandman in Bates Motel you don't find memorable, and I do. So there you go.
I always remember, I think in season 3, when he first dresses as Mother and thinks he's her and is making breakfast for Dylan, and we were laughing at that. And
that wasn't very nice of us.
I said something like, oh, finally, we've been waiting 2.5 seasons, and there it is. And yet there was still a lot of build-up to come because they didn't know exactly how many seasons they were going to have and when he was going to actually kill her and become her.
At what stage did he start sort of hallucinating her? Because I do remember seeing that and going, it's already started.
Yes, now they had that very early, possibly 1, definitely 2, but then they had a break from it. He didn't see her as a hallucination for a long time, and then they brought it back after he'd started dressing up as her. And I said, oh yeah, that's a good thing they brought it back, taking the show in the right direction.
Yes, and that reminds me how we've been talking about different attitudes towards mental illness in the different times, and of course in the 2010s, the tenties, as I think I've heard them called, not only do we sympathise with Norman, but also there is an explanation for his illness, which is in keeping with modern ideas on mental illness about creating barriers to shield yourself from emotional trauma, which is very unlike Dr. Richmond's explanation and a lot fuller and more understandable. It's not just he's crazy, it's things happen to him and he reacted in this way. So I thought that was very interesting.
Yes, it's a very good show in many ways. I thought it could have paid direct homage to Psycho in some places where it didn't include things like his best friend and his mother would all go a little mad sometimes. And sometimes it did that, but often I think it missed the chances. And perhaps people watching it, not knowing the films that well, don't really notice or care, and it doesn't really matter. In season 5, final season, which was on earlier this year, they did their parallel continuity, new continuity with Psycho, and had a new version of Marion and Sam Loomis and things. And I thought it really only paid lip service to Psycho in some ways. It was a bit like the Animals of Farming Wood prequel book, where they had the first meeting of the animals introducing the oath of common safety, not as a big thing, an important thing, an organic thing in the plot, but it was just stuck in there because it kind of had to be. And I felt that way about Norman and Marion's conversation in the parlour and stuff. So I'd have preferred to see the series end without delving into and changing the actual events of Psycho to that degree.
Yes, given that they did that, I was sort of hoping to see Arbogast, because it finished up with Marion running away with the money. Surely he'd be after her, even though she wasn't killed. It was interesting. I'm not sure whether it was effective or not. The very different thing that they did with Sam in the film, and I wrote an essay about this, well, including this for my A-level media studies. In the film with Sam, they helped to build sympathy by telling us he's divorced, he has to pay all this alimony to his ex-wife until she gets remarried, which shows the old-fashioned attitudes toward marriage and money and men and women. In the TV show, he was a still married, lying, cheating ratbag. And I do remember sussing it out when a seemingly random man came with a girl that we didn't see to the motel and said, I need a room for an hour, and Norman's like, well, you have to have it for the night, and they go and they have it off and everything, and I said, I just bet that's Sam and Marion. They were quite impressed that I sussed that. And then he still had this sweet, kind wife who we'd met before we met him, so we already sympathised with her. So they did a lot to do the same basic story in a different way. Whether it was wise or not, I don't really know.
When I read in about February this year, they've completed filming on Bates Motel, and 2 days later all the sets were written down, and the network is never making any scripted shows again, I thought, that means they're going to do like in a Shakespeare tragedy or something, just kill everyone off before the end so that they can never be tempted to come back to it and say, yes, this is definitely the end of the story. So they kind of had to include their own version of Psycho in it, which I do think is a bit of a shame, really. I'd have liked to see, in 20 years' time, Norman gets out of the institution and tries to get back to normal life. Alex comes after him, still mad for revenge, even though he's old. There could have been some interesting things going on there. When we were finishing off our read-through of the D'Artagnan romances last week, which you'll remember we were doing over the course of a few years from our D'Artagnan and the Three Muskehounds podcast, I thought, yes, here we are coming to the end of The Man in the Iron Mask. Alexandre wants to finish off now, and is just sort of thinking, well, how can I kill off this character? Well, better kill off that character now, so that, yes, this is definitely the end. And that's very much what they were doing on Bates Motel. And what did we get to see of characters not getting killed off in Bates Motel? Bloody annoying Dylan and Emma with her new lungs.
We didn't even mention her before, did we?
And I thought, God, that's a sickening ending. I'd much rather have seen possible future for Norman and his madness and Alex and his revenge. But no, everyone's dead apart from Dylan and Emma. Wow, great ending. And speaking of endings, that seems to be the ending of our Psycho Bates Motel podcast. Hopefully you'll come back and join us again on the final Sunday in October for a podcast on The Dreamstone, another CITV series in the spotlight. 52 episodes of basically the same thing happening over and over again, and I'm sure by then we'll have watched the first 6 episodes on DVD and have thought of some extremely interesting things to say about it.
Perhaps we'll also say something about Bimble Bucket, which is the same basic show.
Yes, indeed. Until then, thanks for listening, and
good night out there.
Whatever you are.